Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Marketing Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. In October 2023, the Illinois CPA Society, in partnership with the Center for Accounting Transformation, convened a coalition of 27 additional research partners to conduct a new national survey to gain fresh insight into the current drivers of decisions to become CPAs or not. The report, Re-Decoding the Decline, reveals respondents' perceptions of CPAs and the CPA credential, along with the top challenges and deterrents driving their decisions. Here with me from the Illinois CPA Society to discuss the research and the report is Geof Brown, President and CEO, and Kari Natale, Vice President of Strategy and Governance. Welcome, Geof and Kari.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Don. Good to be here.
Good. And Kari, this is your second time, so you're part of our two-timers club.
I got asked back.
That's right. So you must have done okay the first time.
You get a fancy jacket like Saturday Night Live.
We have talked about that because we've had a couple of two-timers. We've talked about some sort of acknowledgement, but we'll think about that after the podcast. Yeah. All right. So Geof, since this is your first time, we'll ask you the first question just so you can break the ice a little bit. So back in 2021, the Illinois CPA Society released one of the first studies into the decline in the number of individuals pursuing the CPA license. And in fact, it might have been the first, not one of the first. You guys probably know better than I do. But why did you decide to revisit the issue and release Re-Decoding the Decline?
Don, that's a great question. One of the things that was pretty obvious to us was, the conversation around the profession's talent needs. It was definitely heating up. And there were a lot of instances where different groups, different bodies were pointing to that research. And if you think back to 2020, 2021, when we fielded the original survey, it was a different world. It was a different time. And so we felt like the data, while valid, was certainly under the guise of what was happening globally with the pandemic. And so given the opportunity, we decided that we wanted to redeploy the survey. We wanted to expand its reach. We wanted to increase participation and gain fresh insights. And so by doing that, we felt like we were bringing to bear on the profession just a greater depth of research. And we really feel like we met that goal.
All right, great. So Kari, let's dig into the details of the survey. First, let's start out who participated and what were some of the key takeaways?
So the participants were accounting students and accounting professionals under the age of 35. That included both CPAs and non-CPAs. We had a really great turnout. We had increased that participation, as Geof mentioned, was one of our goals. We had an impressive 7,780 people complete it, over 10,000 started. And I think for me, what stood out the most were probably some of the key takeaways. Let's see. One would be such a positive perception on the credential. So key takeaway for me was, even among those who didn't want the CPA credential, more than 85% of them found it very valuable in the marketplace. 80% thought it was beneficial to their own careers, and that it offered higher earning potentials, greater job security, and benefits like that. Another key finding for us was obviously related to the top deterrents or challenges that respondents face or that they anticipated facing in becoming a CPA. And the top three challenges were workload and personal time commitments for studying for the exam and the difficulty of the exam content.
So did anything about the results surprise you? Because I know you were a big part of the research back in 2021. So did anything surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that even though we more than tripled the number of responses, that the results were still very similar. I thought we were going to see some big shifts since, we've gone through a pandemic and there's been a lot of talk around this topic, but the results were eerily similar. I guess to flip your question, maybe what didn't surprise me was that when we looked really deeper into the respondents the responses from the respondents who were dropping out of the pipeline, so the people who said they weren't interested in the CPA or that they started and they stopped, that time was still the top deterrent, but for that audience in particular, I wasn't surprised that the second highest was lack of career relevance. I think this is something that we've been talking about for a while now, and that we could do a better job talking about the relevance or the value the credential holds, regardless of where you go in the accounting career, what your desired career path is. And so I guess it didn't surprise me that relevance came up as a reason for not getting.
And I guess the relevance part kind of goes hand in hand with the AICPAs, their national pipeline group came out with those 6 things that they believe that the profession needs to do in order to help with the pipeline. And I think it was items 1 and 6, not that they're necessarily ranked, but one was tell a better story, and the other one was kind of like, well, make the story better, if I can paraphrase what they want. So I think the kind of the relevance thing kind of goes hand in hand with those 2 things. Is I think everybody agrees we need to tell a better story, but in order to tell a better story, you also need a better story. And you and I, we saw each other earlier in July, and we talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely something we can control. I think if their time investment is the biggest deterrent or barrier, we need to make it worth their time. So showing that value is going to be really key.
Right. The other thing I did want to mention is that this was not a survey just limited to the borders of the state of Illinois. I mean, you had a number of partnerships, and you made sure that this was truly a nationwide survey. So you were getting a lot of different perspectives. Maybe talk a little bit about the partnerships that you had.
I think that, thank you for raising that, Don. We wouldn't have been able to do this at this scale without the support of our partners. Our top line partnership was with the Center for the Accounting Transformation. They really did help with, validating the survey instrument, telling the story to a number of state societies. So we had 27 additional research partners, including the AAA, AICPA, Beta Alpha Psi, 24 other state-based CPA membership associations. And that really did facilitate us getting to that number. We have respondents from all 50 states. Plus some from overseas. And I really do think that tells a much better story about what's happening, and not very different than what happened in 2020, 2021. But just, having that level of reach, no one can say, well, that's Illinois' problem or Illinois' opportunity. This is a nationwide problem and a nationwide opportunity.
Right. No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So you both mentioned time. So time emerged as the top ranked challenge to becoming a CPA. So Geof, from your perspective, what can organizations like the NJCPA, like Illinois, what can we do, and what can the accounting profession do to help with that challenge?
I think organizations like ours and yours could definitely, advocate for firms, advocate for organizations in corporate finance to really create that space, to give their people the opportunity to study for the exam, get creative in terms of providing opportunities for them to have potential, leaves of absences with pay, just really, honing in on what's going to create that time and space for them to do what they need to do to sit for, study for, and pass the exam successfully. I think we need to have a bigger conversation nationwide about when individuals sit for the exam. So making sure that it's in the right place in their overall kind of career life cycle, if you will. I think that's a great opportunity. We can't solve for the difficulty of the exam content, nor should we. But to the extent that we can create time from a work perspective, show them how they can build studying and whatnot into their personal lives, I think that's a tremendous opportunity for us.
No, I agree. And I think a lot of these things sort of like merge together in talking about telling a better story and having there be a better story in the time issue. One of the other things that struck me with the first batch of research you did in 2021, and this survey as well, was that issue of fear kept coming up. The fear of not passing the exam or the fear of not being able to do the work. And I think what's interesting about all of these things is they all kind of relate back to support. So in order to have more time to take the exam or study for the exam, you need support. In order to not feel fearful about the exam, you need support. So the fear that, I think your study is the only place I've seen that issue of fear. And I think it's not getting enough attention, that this idea that I agree with you. I think the exam should be hard. I don't think the process of getting there should be hard, which now that's probably another issue. But that issue of fear, if you could talk about that a little bit, because I don't think that gets enough attention.
It's interesting that you bring that up, the fear aspect. I think I read an article this morning about Gen Z and the test taking anxiety that's in that audience. Did you see the same article?
I did, yeah.
I think it really does play hand in hand. I think that, all throughout their lives, there's just been this anxiety that's been built up. And I think we can do a better job of just breaking down what's involved in the exam. But I think it starts with the process. The process of applying for the exam is just there's so many steps, there's so many rules. I think we need to do a better job of like simplifying that, making it a little bit more transparent, and just really inviting people into the process. When you put up a real or perceived barrier with people even getting to the place where they're walking into a testing center, you can think about all the anxiety that's built up. And so I think, one of the things that we need to do is, study cohorts, study buddies. I was at a recent NASBA conference and they were talking about their Facebook group of it's like exam candidates and people that have taken the exam, and the level of traffic and the way they're interacting with one another, answering each other's questions. I think there's some limited monitoring and moderation just to make sure the right information is getting out there. But I think that kind of peer-to-peer, learner-to-learner type of engagement is incredibly important. When we think about putting people in through review courses, the review courses are intense. And I think that is just another step, another layer that's adding to that anxiety. And so to the extent that we can kind of decouple that, or just kind of lighten the load a little bit. Yes, this should be kind of a process that, when they see the prize, it should be good for them. But, we need to make it a smoother, more transparent and more accessible process. I think that'll do a long way of, cutting back on the fear.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we did an event back in May. We called it Accelerating Scholars in Accounting. We had about 50 college students come to our headquarters in Roseland. And we did a variety of different programs. And we had one panel, which was members who had taken and passed the CPA exam. So they were CPAs and they were speaking to these 50 students about their journey. And what I found fascinating about all the stories they told were about the process of getting to the exam. They didn't really, they would say very casually, like, I didn't pass the first time, but then I took all 4 sections, I passed them all. But they had all of these stories about what happened, even getting to the exam center. So it was all these things about, like you said, it was all these stories about the process. So I completely agree. And I think that's something that we as state societies can actually have some effect on, is helping them with that process.
I think another piece, and, Kari and I have kind of talked about this a little bit. Whenever we talk with more seasoned CPAs who maybe took the exam in a different format, they don't necessarily, lend a supportive ear to the process that individuals go through now. It always starts off, well, when I did it. And you know what? That when I did it isn't necessarily helpful. All it's doing is painting a distinction, and that distinction sometimes gives today's candidates a feeling that, my process isn't as rigorous, or it's a little bit less than theirs. I don't have to go and be in the same place for 2 days straight. I get to,
Right.
take a section, go away, take another section, go away. The exam isn't any less rigorous. And the fact that you have to think about doing it 4 times, that's 4 times the pressure in my mind.
When I think of fear of failure and confidence, when I'm working with students today, a lot of it is just the fear of starting. It's like Geof mentioned, like, just get started. And it's not like it seems like a daunting process. So just helping our student members over that first hurdle, and is a big help across that barrier.
No, I agree. And we see it not just with the CPA exam, but we even see it. I know Illinois has a scholarship program. We have a scholarship program. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I'm not going to apply because I'm not going to get it. And you try and say, well, yeah, but think of the reward. If you do get it, you'll get X amount. Just like with the CPA exam, if you pass the exam, you're a CPA, and think of the financial rewards. They don't think of that. That the initial fear overcomes them. They're just like, no, I'm not going to get it, or I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to even start, as you said. So, Kari, we've been talking about some of the things that were revealed during the survey. What was interesting was some of the hot talking points about the pipeline appear less of a concern to the respondents in the survey. So where did issues like really hot button issues such as the 150-hour requirement and the cost of the exam, where did those rank in terms of concerns?
Yeah, so when we asked that question, there were several options they could pick from, and they could pick 3 and then rank them. And so when you looked at the top responses or by rank, issues like that extra academic time commitment for more credits, the cost for the additional credits, the cost for the exam fees was not highly selected by our audience. Even when we broke out the respondent categories, it didn't rise to the top on any category of where somebody was in the process. And this was very consistent with the 2020 results.
And I think a number of months ago, Kimberly Ellison-Taylor, former chair of the AICPA and also president of the Maryland Association, she wrote an article and she pointed out that the 150-hour requirement seemed to be a bigger concern for existing CPAs than students and recent graduates. And I kind of found that interesting. And that's where a lot of the discussion is really happening. It's happening amongst organizations like ours, amongst our members, people who have been CPAs for a really long time. Probably concerned just about the talent aspect of it. Like if the 150 requirement didn't exist, we'd be able to bring more people into the profession that would help my business or my firm.
Yeah, my stance on that is it's a barrier, right? These are all barriers. They wouldn't have made our list of 15 barriers to choose from if it's not a barrier. And the reality is more credit hours is more time, and whether we asked it for time in the work environment or personal time commitments or time for your academic time is time. But my stance is, we can get more accounting majors, we can create more pathways to 150, we can make the exam free. But if these students still don't think it's worth their time, the value doesn't outweigh the time, I don't see people rushing to take the CPA exam until we can crack that.
Go a step further. I mean, if we can get them to the point where they're sitting for the exam, to Kari's point, what are we going to do to change the experience to keep them in the profession? I think all of this talk around the 150-hour rule and how it's, inhibiting some of our talent needs. Yeah, I think it deserves some airtime, maybe not as much airtime. I think we need to spend more airtime focused on what's their experience like in those first few years, so that they're doing work that's relevant, they're doing work that's meaningful, they're making an impact, and they're learning, and then they're going to stay in the profession. That's really what we need.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and we've had a lot of discussions about this, about, well, if we tell them that the profession is this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and they get to the end of the rainbow and the pot of gold's not there and they have a lousy experience, then what was the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
If they don't stick around, to your point, then all those things we did in high school and early college to tell them how great a profession is, it's all meaningless if they don't actually have a good experience.
And Don, one thing I wanted to add to that, one thing we talked about when I saw you a few weeks ago, there's a lot of nationwide surveys out there about the pipeline, and some do point to 150 credit hours. Like I think it's hard to compare these results to different surveys because they're really targeting different audiences. So like if you ask high school students or business majors, or like Geof was talking about earlier, experienced accounting or CPA professionals, they're going to have different observations and identify different barriers. And so it doesn't mean that they aren't barriers, but our survey specifically focused on those who already chose to major in accounting and are currently or recently in the CPA pipeline. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. And to your earlier point, Kari, I think it's certainly 150 certainly is a barrier, but it's not the only barrier. So even if it's so-called, fixed, there's still going to be other barriers that the profession has to overcome in order to help with this pipeline issue.
I just hope there's the amount of energy for that as there is around people wanting to talk about 150.
I know if we could harness that passion around 150 and we could apply it to a number of other things, like you were saying, the experience, that would go a long way. Yeah. So Geof, Kari, any last minute thoughts about the survey do you want to share with our listeners or watchers? Geof, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, to Kari's point, don't take this in a vacuum. Look at all of the research that's out there. And think about all the opportunities that are created by the things that we've learned from them. One of the reasons why we did this, we didn't have to. We knew that, to Kari's point, there were a number of other groups out there that were doing research. We knew that the National Pipeline Advisory Group was doing research. We all looked at different audiences, which means we have overlapping results that tell the complete story of how the profession can address some of the challenges from a workforce and talent perspective.
Great points. Kari?
There's a lot of pressure to increase the pipeline, but there's also a lot of excitement. And so I think capitalizing on that, I think supporting everybody's efforts, whether they're trying to modernize the credential, they're trying to strengthen or start new initiatives. I think all initiatives are valuable and can make a difference at different levels. For us, though, I think the one thing I keep emphasizing is to just consider the aspect of time in all of the initiatives that we prioritize.
Yeah, that's a great point about passion. We have 11 chapters around the state, and for more than 2 decades, their primary focus was on providing low-cost local CPE for our members. But that equation has changed, and as we've had discussions with them about what do you want the role of chapters and chapter leadership to be, almost universally they said pipeline. We want to reach out to high schools, we want to reach out to colleges. So, to the earlier point about harnessing that passion, hopefully we can harness that passion and put our members to work, because they're always so willing to help out with issues like this. So Geof and Kari, this was a great conversation. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching. To access the Recoding the Decline report, visit ICPAS.org. For articles, resources, and events about the accounting talent pipeline, visit NJCPA.org/pipeline.